you. But right now, let's go ahead and focus on energy and blood sugar. So here, our muscles, in order to function, require energy. Now, that energy in our cells is called ATP. So here you have your muscles and they need ATP. Well, then the question becomes, well, where does ATP come from, right? And that's where we learned about the organelle called the mitochondria. You may have learned that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But in reality, the mitochondria does so much more than just act as a powerhouse. So the mitochondria is really what's responsible for breaking down our food molecules and then using the electrons really from our mitochondria to help generate ATP for our bodies. So when we look at, well, what does the mitochondria need to do this? Well, first, it needs some glucose. And if you remember from our macromolecules unit, carbohydrates or sugar are what give us energy. And this is how, when we say sugar gives you energy or carbs give you energy, this is how they do it. This is what your mitochondria is going to break apart. So the mitochondria is going to take our blood sugar, but also you may wonder why when you exercise, your breathing increases. You breathe more deeply, right? Like you're trying to get gasp for air if you're sprinting or something. It's because your mitochondria also need oxygen. So in order to make ATP, your mitochondria need glucose or food and oxygen. And then they can do a whole bunch of really cool chemical reactions that produce ATP. But they also, just like a powerhouse, a power plant, they also produce waste. So the waste by the mitochondria is actually carbon dioxide, which is what we're exhaling. So when we're running and we're breathing heavy, we're taking in oxygen for our mitochondria, but we're also exhaling it. We're taking oxygen, we're also exhaling the carbon dioxide from our mitochondria. And then the other waste is water. Water is also produced during those chemical reactions. So let's summarize real fast because cellular respiration on its own is a whole nother topic. So just a refresher of what I just said, when we talk about cellular respiration and making energy for our cells, it does require glucose, which we got from our digestive system, really, and oxygen, which is from our respiratory system. We breathe it in. Then our circulatory system, our blood vessels will carry it to our cells. But the mitochondria is going to take in those two reactants, those two things, and produce a whole bunch of ATP for us. And then we have waste products. So carbon dioxide is a waste of the mitochondria. That cell will produce carbon dioxide. It'll enter into our circulatory system, which will carry it to our respiratory system for us to exhale. Water is also a waste product here. So when we think about this, so cell respiration requires oxygen and glucose. And both of those are going to require our respiratory system, our circulatory system, and our digestive system. Well, I shouldn't say both. Both require our circulatory system, but the oxygen entered our bodies through the respiratory, and the glucose, our sugar, entered through the digestive system. And then what's produced in respiration is we have carbon dioxide and water, but also the main purpose was that ATP energy. And you notice during these chemical reactions, whenever you're making a lot of energy, you also get hot. So some of the energy in our food is actually coming off as heat. Okay, so let's return and go back to our discussion on blood sugar and maintaining homeostasis. So if our cells need glucose to make ATP, how do we keep our blood sugar levels balanced or in homeostasis if we're constantly requiring ATP, but yet we're not always eating, right? So let's think about the different organ systems that are going to work together to maintain this homeostasis. So first is our digestive system. We need to eat that sugar. And then we need a way for that sugar to actually get to our cells, which is going to be our circulatory system, which is made of our blood vessels, our arteries, veins, and capillaries. And then we need our muscular system that actually will have the mitochondria and take that glucose and use the ATP. But then we also need oxygen, remember? So we got to be able to take in and breathe in oxygen. So that's our respiratory system. But a waste product was carbon dioxide. So we also have to exhale that carbon dioxide. Now that gas, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, got to our cells by our circulatory system. But now here's a new system. In order to maintain balance within our cells, we have what's called We have the endocrine system, and the endocrine system uses hormones to help maintain balance. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about endocrine system. So the endocrine system releases chemical signals called hormones that are going to travel through our blood to our target cells to help maintain our balance. So when we look at our blood sugar and homeostasis, so let's pretend you eat a high carbohydrate meal, lots of sugar, pancakes covered in syrup. Now your blood sugar levels are going to increase, right? So if our blood sugar levels increase, we are no longer in balance. So our blood sugar increases, we have to think to ourselves, how are we going to get our blood sugar back to balance? This is where our endocrine system, we're not in homeostasis anymore. This is where our endocrine system comes into play. So our pancreas, that gland, is actually going to release the hormone insulin. Insulin will travel in our blood, our circulatory system, where it will target our liver and our muscle cells. And it's going to tell our liver and muscle cells, hey, you know what? We have a little too much sugar in our blood right now. We're not in homeostasis. We got to bring us back to balance. So now the liver will and the muscles will actually take sugar out of our blood and store it as a polysaccharide called glycogen. And that will help to bring us back to homeostasis. So as a quick summary, let me put into words for you. When our blood glucose levels increase, so we have a lot of sugar after a meal, for example, our pancreas will release the hormone insulin. Insulin is going to target our liver and our muscle cells, and it's going to have them take in glucose out of our blood and store it in a chain called glycogen. So that polysaccharide glycogen is how we store our sugar for later, for times when we're not eating. So now our blood sugar has dropped and we're back to balance. So let's think about though, what happens when you exercise though? This glucose is a source of energy. So when you're exercising, you're going to use up that glucose to make that ATP for your muscles. So then your blood sugar levels are going to drop, right? So if your blood sugar levels drop because you use some of it, well, now we're out of homeostasis. So we have to think to ourselves, oh no, how can we get our blood sugar levels back to balance, right? So that is where our pancreas, part of our endocrine system, which is it's a gland, will release the opposite hormone called glucagon. It'll actually travel to our liver and it'll tell our liver, oh no, our blood sugar levels are too low. And it's going to actually hydrolyze, or it'll help to break that polysaccharide glycogen into individual sugar molecules. And it'll put that glucose back into our blood, bringing us back to balance. So when you look at words, oh, we're back to balance. Okay, so for example, when our blood glucose levels decrease, the pancreas will release glucagon. Sorry, that liver should have already been there. To tell your liver, hey, we need to bring our sugar levels back to balance. So we'll actually take the sugar from our liver and put it back into our blood, keeping us nice and balanced. Okay. So I have one more just visual of the same concept, so you get it in two different ways for your brain to picture it. So here, let's say within our blood, we have blood sugar flowing with our blood cells. Okay, it flows through our body in our circulatory system. So let's pretend in this example that 3 glucose equals homeostasis. Okay, that's going to be our baseline. So let's say you eat a meal like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, very high in carbs, sugars, and starches. So now your blood sugar rises. You just ate a whole bunch of sugar. So now are you still in homeostasis? No. Your body's like, oh my gosh, way too much sugar. So now we need to work to bring us back to balance, to bring us back to homeostasis. So when we think about how this happens, we have our pancreas, that gland, part of the endocrine system. It's going to release the hormone insulin. Insulin actually will travel through our blood, through our circulatory system. It's going to target our liver and our muscle cells. And it'll tell our liver and our muscle cells to start to take in glucose, really by facilitated diffusion. So now that glucose is going to be taken from our blood It's going to flow from a high concentration in our blood into a lower concentration inside of our cells. And it's going to form that polysaccharide glycogen. And now it can store it for times when you're not eating. However, you may be thinking to yourself, I thought 3 glucoses represented homeostasis. Here you can see our blood sugars are still too high. So sometimes not sometimes, but all the time, when our liver and our muscle cells are full, they cannot hold any more glucose. If your blood sugar is still too high, it's still above homeostasis, what we can do is we can actually take that glucose and turn it into fat. We can actually store it as like triglycerides, which is a long-term energy storage, and we can save that in our fat cells for later. So fat is kind of like a fat cell is like an energy reservoir. It's how we can carry around stored energy for us. So now, once we've taken any extra sugar in our blood, we can now save it as fat. And now we're back to homeostasis with those 3. Okay, so now let's pretend that you ate lunch at school around 11:30. And then you went through the rest of your classes. Now it's after school and it's cross-country practice. And you haven't eaten for hours, right? And you're running. So as you run, that is going to take energy. You are using those glucose molecules. Now your blood sugar is low. So what happens, your pancreas will actually release that opposite hormone called glucagon that takes that stored sugar from your liver and sends it back into your bloodstream so you can continue to exercise and make those ATPs. So when we look at the overall big picture, okay, and you continue to exercise. So when you look at the overall big picture of maintaining constant blood sugar balance, it relies on 2 hormones, insulin and glucagon, both released from the pancreas, and they're both hormones. So hormones and glands are part of the endocrine system that'll work with the circulatory system to travel throughout the body to bring about their cell responses. All right, so that is my example of blood sugar and how our endocrine system and circulatory system work together to maintain balance.